Hi, and welcome to this webinar. It is already the 101 Areopa webinar, so a really proud number of it. I'm Bert Verbeek, I'm your host for today. And today on the webinar, we have got the presentation on how to be a prompt engineer by Tine. And he did this presentation on direction EMEA, and the feedback that he received was very good. It was even maybe the best presentation on the whole conference. So, and even also Microsoft has asked him to give this presentation to a couple of partners. So we are very proud to have him on this Areopa webinar. And I've also seen it already, and he's got a lot of good insights to how to create a good prompt. So having a great webinar on this. First of all, some housekeeping rules. Your mic is muted. You can ask questions in the question window, and after the presentation is done, I will pick up the questions and ask it to Trina, and he can answer it today. This webinar is also recorded, and the recording will be shared hopefully today or tomorrow on the YouTube channel. And there is already a list of all the other videos out there. And if you want to know more about Areopa webinars and you haven't registered it yourself, please register to the newsletter, and frequently you get updates from the upcoming webinars. And we have already got a couple of upcoming webinars. In 2 weeks, KB will present Don't Be a Messy AL Developer. Then 2 weeks later, Søren from Microsoft will do his presentation on 45 tips in 45 minutes. Then Benito will have a chat about seamless integration with BizCentral and Shopify. And the last one that we got here, that is test automation for connected system by Patrick. But we are always constantly looking for new speakers and topics for that. So if you have one, or do you have an interesting topic, just suggest one to our team. And the last slide before I ask giving the word to Tina is to thanks our sponsor for NAV for making this happening. Without any sponsors, this great platform won't be there. So thanks a lot for that. And then Tina, you have the floor, and I'm going to make you the presenter.
Perfect. Thank you, Beth. Okay, welcome everyone to How to Be a Prompt Engineer. You know, this new role, this new job title that will replace developers, replace consultants, replace managers. We don't need any of those roles. We just need to be prompt engineers in the future. I don't really believe that, but I do believe that in the upcoming AI era, we have to know how to work with AI. We have to know how to prompt it in a good manner. I always like to start my presentations by explaining where did the idea for this session come from. And for the prompt engineer one, it came about a year ago when we had an internal hackathon of sorts at Companion, an innovation day of sorts. What I was thinking to myself back then was, what if we could use AI to create a backlog management helper? Because my day-to-day job looks like this. I get development requirements from various different partners, either through an email, either through a PDF document or a Word document. And at the end of the day, I have to copy paste user stories or bugs out of those documents and paste them in Azure DevOps backlogs where we actually track our projects. So I thought to myself, what if I could use AI for this? What if I can throw the whole requirements document into AI, and AI will extract user stories out of them, and I can use that to create backlog items. So after about 10 or so hours of innovating, this is what we came up with. You would log into Azure DevOps, and there would be this big upload button where you can put in the whole PDF or the whole Word document of requirements, and that would be uploaded to a blob storage. At the same time, an Azure function would be triggered that's going to pull that document down, create it into a good prompt, send it off to OpenAI, which will extract the contents into user stories into a nice little JSON format, and I can use that to send API calls to Azure DevOps. Now, that was the idea. After 10 hours, this is what we came up with. After 10 hours, we knew how to upload documents. We knew how to download documents. We knew how to create an Azure function, how to send the requests to OpenAI, how to send the requests to Azure DevOps. But here's where we struggled. We didn't know how to make a good prompt. And because we didn't know how to make a good prompt, AI gave us bad results. And with bad results, this whole product didn't work. This helper didn't work. This is how our prompt looked like after about 10 hours. Just 3 poor sentences. And with a bad prompt, it didn't really matter that all of the developers knew how to build everything around AI. We didn't know how to work with AI. And that's when I got the idea, okay, we need to go deeper into this prompt engineering topic. And once I found out some of the best practices, I decided, let's make this into a session. But before we go deeper into how do you become a prompt engineer, how do you build a good prompt, just a quick introduction from my side. My name is Tine. I'm an architect at Companion, and last year I became an MVP. So 2024 was a really cool year for me. But I prefer to introduce myself as 3 things. Being very passionate about baking right now. I don't know why, but I love to bake. I'm really passionate about brewing beer. I used to have my own beer brewery, and that's a hobby that I really want to get back into. And I quite enjoy working with Business Central. So those are the 3 things that I am. But on the other side, what am I not? I am not somebody who has spent the last 10 years working with AI. I do not have a machine learning background. But at the same time, I also don't think any of you do. And that's exactly how I wanted to structure this presentation. So this is not a session for anybody who has spent the last couple of years already working with AI. This is a session for people who know how to work with Business Central, who live in the Business Central world, and we now have to learn how to take that additional step to learn how to work with AI. In regards to the agenda for today, I want to teach you 3 things. How do you build a good prompt with structure and examples? And once you have a good prompt, how do you turn that good prompt into a great prompt using some of the model's capabilities or some of the framework features that we have in AL? And once we turn a good prompt into a great prompt, the last part is going to be, how do we keep a great prompt great? It's going to be all about testing prompts and testing AI features. Now, I'm a big enthusiast when it comes to testing, automated testing, the traditional kind of test automation. But in this 3rd part, I'm going to share with you 3 very concrete examples why testing is even more important when it comes to AI features. But above all else, the main thing that I want you to remember out of this session is don't build your prompts the way you talk to ChatGPT. Because ChatGPT is a very powerful chatbot, but the features that we build in Business Central, they're not like ChatGPT. So our prompts cannot be like the prompts we use for ChatGPT. Before we jump into how do you make a good prompt, I first want to share with you a demo that I've seen roughly a year and a half ago from Scott Hanselman, a VP at Microsoft, where he showcased that large language models are not some very smart machines that seem to understand our questions, understand our prompts, but are in reality just very dumb computers that make some calculations and then choose whichever word makes most sense to us. which word sounds the best. And for that, we're going to go into OpenAI's playground. Think of what you're seeing right now as if we took ChatGPT and looked under the hood. So what's happening when you ask a question to ChatGPT? You can see that I have all sorts of parameters in here. So let's ask the model to complete a sentence for us. Something like, today is a good day. Let's go to A. And now I don't have a live audience, but Bert, I'm gonna use you. Today's a good day, Bert. Where would you like to go?
I want to go to the beach.
To the beach, okay. That's a good choice. In Lithuania right now it's snowing, so I would not like to go to the beach. But beach or forest or restaurant, all of these would be valid completions to a sentence here, right? Let's see how the model would like to complete this sentence. Okay, the model would like to go to a friend's house. Valid completion as well. But let me show you this. If I click on the word friend, you will see that this is just one of the options that the model could go for. The model could go for park, or party, or cafe, or museum, or restaurant. All of these words would also make sense. So let me show you something else. The model, as we saw, just calculates probabilities and then decides on one of those words, whichever word it thinks it should come next in a sentence. Let me show you what happens if I remove this part of the sentence, remove the completion, and add a sentence in the beginning. I just bought a new swimsuit. So I just bought a new swimsuit. Today's a good day. I guess, Bert, you would still like to go to the beach if I told you that you just got a new swimsuit.
Of course.
Let's see what the model thinks if we just bought a new swimsuit. What would be a good location to go to? Still a friend's house. Okay, unexpected. However, what I want to show you is that different words now have a high probability. Previously, I didn't stop long there, but previously the highest probability word was park. Now the highest probability word is pool, beach, swimming, water. These are the kind of words that now make sense because we adjusted our prompt. Okay, so as soon as we added an additional prompt to our sentence, different words got different probabilities. If we look at the completions here, what you will notice is that some words are colored green, some words are colored yellow, and some are red. What does that mean? Green words means that the model chose the highest probability word. Red words mean that it chose a more risky word, something that isn't the highest probability. Now, how does it make that decision? That's all based on temperature. Right now, we have the temperature set to 1. Which means we're saying to the model, hey, you can be creative, but you don't, you can be creative a little bit, so feel free to choose some of the risky words. If we change the temperature all the way down to 0, and we remove our completion, and ask the model to complete the sentence again, you'll notice that now a pool is the word it chose. Because pool has the highest probability, and with the temperature set to 0, we said to the model, don't be creative, don't be risky, go for the safe words. And that's why all of the words here are either green or yellowish. Now, just for the fun of it, let's see what happens if we change the temperature all the way to 2. Now, we're saying to the model, be as creative as you want to be. Make all the choices that you want. Let's submit it. Okay, let me cancel. Let's go back up. Today's a good day. Let's go to a shop at Lighthouse, Creature, Description, Face, Recharge, Babe, Sherman, Insure. Nothing makes sense anymore. So this is more or less garbage completion, but we cannot blame the model for this garbage completion. We said to the model, hey, temperature 2.0, be as creative as you want to be. So this is all just to point out that language models are not some super smart machines that understand our prompts, that understand our questions. Language models are dumb computers calculating probabilities and then choosing the one based on temperature. But as we saw with our swimsuit example over here, if you modify the prompt, that's how you influence which words are going to have high probability. So that's why it's important that we build a good prompt. Now, if we come back to our initial example, our 3 poor sentences of a bad prompt, this is how I think the model thought about our prompt once we send it off. It didn't really know what to do with it. We left so many details out of that prompt that the model made its own choices. And when we wanted the model to go left and it went right, we didn't quite like the results. And when the model went right, but we wanted it to go left, we again didn't like those results. So how do we make it better? We make a good prompt. How do we make a good prompt? We follow these 5 components. A good prompt has instructions, steps, format requirements, examples, and notes. I will be repeating these 5 components quite a couple of times throughout the presentation today. But in this first part, I want to share with you a couple of prompting techniques that you might have already heard about and that actually they tie into these 5 components, with the first one being few-shot learning. Few-shot learning is a very common prompting technique. In other words, few-shot learning means don't only tell the model what you want, show the model how you want it. And if we talk about few-shot learning through an example, let's take a look at a feature that we could build in Business Central. Something where a user could come in and say, I would like to add 50 units of item A and 100 units of item B to the purchase order. So something like the sales line copilot, which we already have, right? Just for the purchase side. If we were building a system prompt, a naive system prompt for this feature could look something like this. Please extract the items mentioned and add them to the purchase order that the user would like to add to the purchase order and return them in JSON format. So that would be telling the model what we want. But few-shot learning is saying, don't only tell, also show the model how you want it. And this is how it would look like. Instead of just specifying our instructions, we also say, hey, look, if a user would specify something like, please add 30 units of item X, 10 units of item Y, 5 units of item Z, this is how the JSON should look like. If the input text would look something like include 15 units of part A, 20 units of part B, then this is how the JSON should look like. So we're not only telling the model what we want, we're showing the model how we want it. And few-shot learning, this very common prompting technique, it's nothing but examples in our 5 components. And if we look at the examples we had in our backlog management helper, we added a section where we provided how a user story section would look like and how the JSON should look like, how the bug list would look like and how the JSON should look like, and the same for the use case document. So that was few-shot learning. Another very common prompting technique that you've heard of is chain of thought, or in other words, give the model time to think. Let's look at this one through a different example. Let's say we want to build a feature where the user can come in and say, determine if a discount of 12% can be approved for an order value of 8,000. Again, a naive prompt would look like this. Determine if a discount can be approved. If the value is above 10K, max discount 15%. If it's between 5 and 10K, max discount 10%. If it's below 5K, max discount 5%. Now, this system prompt might work if we try it out. And if we try it out again, it might work again. And if we try it for the 3rd time, we might be successful for the 3rd time. But here's the catch. When you start to scale your prompts into hundreds, thousands of executions, that's when you start to notice that your prompt actually only works about 60% of the time. But we don't want to be in the 60% of time. We want to be in the 80s, 90s, 100% of time. And that's why we apply these prompting techniques, because prompting techniques help us get a higher percentage of reliability. And with chain of thought, we don't only give this matrix to the model, we also give it steps. So we say, hey, here's the matrix, how you would calculate it, and here are the steps how you would think through this problem. And you don't see me, but I'm showing think with air quotes, because like we saw in the OpenAI's playground, the models don't actually think, they just calculate and assume. But still, the steps here would look something like identify the order value, determine the discount threshold, compare the discount with the threshold, and only then make a decision. And chain of thought, with our 5 components, it's steps. So in our backlog management helper, steps looked like this. Read and understand the input, identify key components, structure information. Okay. So we went through the few-shot learning, we went through the chain of thought, and I only have one more prompting technique in this part for you, which is prompt reinforcement, or in other words, anchoring. The more you go into this topic of prompt engineering, the more you realize that it has a lot of parallels compared to speaking to a more junior developer, right? If I gave a 70-page Word document to a junior development and say, hey, can you go and develop this? They might be successful or they might not be. But if at the same time, I also give the developer, hey, here are some examples how we implemented this in the past. Or if I show them, hey, here are some steps how you can think through this problem, their chance of success is going to go up. And the same applies to prompting techniques and prompts. With prompt reinforcements, we're trying to remind the model what we want. So with our previous example, we have our matrix for the value and discounts. We have our steps, but at the very end, we're also going to include a section with notes where we're going to remind the model what we want, ensure that the requested discount is compared, follow each rule carefully, and then provide a clear final decision as either approve or reject. And the same would apply to the junior developer. We give them examples, we give them steps, but if at the very end, we also tell them, hey, here are the key parts that you should pay attention to, they are going to be more successful developing that requirement. So how do you build a good prompt? Instructions, steps, format requirements, examples, notes. Here's how our poor prompt looked like. Here's how our prompt looked like after we applied those best practices. Now the text here is too small for you to read it. We are going to go through individual sections again. But what I wanted to show you here is that a big system prompt is nothing to be afraid of. It's much better to have a big system prompt that gives you reliable results compared to having a small system prompt that's going to fail half of the time. So if we go through individual sections, instruction steps, format requirements, examples, notes, through the way we use them on our backlog management helper, we start with instructions. And nobody really struggles with instructions. Even our 3-sentence prompt at the beginning had instructions. We all know that when talking to AI, we should include what do we actually want from it. Extract the information, analyze the input, structure the extracted data into JSON. So instructions we know how to work with, but the other 4 are the ones that we sometimes forget. Steps. We saw steps already. Chain of thought. Read and understand the input. Identify key components. Structure information. And there's another prompting tip that you might notice on the slide here. Notice how I've made some of the words bold and black and some of the words are gray and just kind of fade into the background. I've used that to guide your attention into the parts that I want you to focus on and parts that are only there for context. And I'm doing the same with the model. First of all, steps are numbered because it's much easier to recognize what step number 1, step number 2, and step number 3 compared to having all of those steps as just one paragraph section. And on top of that, notice that the beginnings of steps have these asterisks on each side, because that's how I'm showing the model, hey, this is what I want you to focus on, and the rest is there for context, so you understand what the step is. Okay. Format requirements. This is where you would specify, if you want a JSON, how that JSON should look like. It should have a title, description, acceptance criteria, priority, dependencies. This one's fairly straightforward. Examples, we saw this one already, few-shot learning. This is where you provide what is an example of an input and what is an example of an output. And finally, once you're done with all of the other parts, you include notes. You remind the model what you want. Always replace double quotes. The goal is to create a JSON and handle varying document structures flexibly. So, how do you make a good prompt? Instructions, steps, format requirements, examples, notes. Instructions, steps, format requirements, examples, notes. Now, as much as I would love for you to remember these 5 steps, these 5 components, you actually don't have to anymore, because there's a shortcut, and I'm going to show it to you. We're going to go back to OpenAI's playground. Right now, we were in this completions view. Now we're going to move to this chat view over here, which in reality is more like looking underneath the hood of ChatGPT. You have your system message over here, you have your user messages over here, and you could test out your prompts. But I needed to be in that completions playground because that's the only option how I could show you the probabilities of each token. But nevertheless, we're going to continue here. This is where you could start building your system message, right? With all of the 5 components that we just talked about. But you could also just click generate. And here it's asking us, what would you like the model to do? Now, I have a prompt here already prepared from my clipboard, not because this would be the only prompt that works, but because usually when I type out things on the webinars, I tend to make typos. So parse out user stories or bugs from a requirements document and return it in JSON format so it can be used to send API requests to Azure DevOps APIs. I still made the typo, but nevertheless, let's create this one. This one's going to take a couple of seconds. If it's going to take too long, I do have a backup here, but still, let's see if it's going to be fast enough. There it is. Let's see what it created. So our new system message looks like this. Parse user stories from requirements documents, convert them into JSON for Azure DevOps API requests. Instructions, check. Steps, identify user stories or bugs, extract relevant information, convert to JSON, validate JSON. So steps, check. Output format. The output should be a JSON object. It should look like this. Title, description, type, priority, acceptance criteria, user role, additional metadata. So output format, check. Examples, example input, example output. So we've got examples, check. Notes, pay special attention to capturing language and terms. Presume the requirements document will contain both complete and incomplete stories, and ensure the JSON output can be directly utilized by Azure DevOps. So notes, check. So you can see that within a couple of seconds, we got a very good starting point. We got a very good system prompt that we can now modify further to get to where we want it to be. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, but trust me, if this shortcut existed 1 year ago, we would not have only 3 poor sentences for our backlog management helper. So how do you build a good prompt? either you follow these 5 steps, these 5 components to build it yourself, or you can get a head start by creating it through OpenAI's Playground. Okay. Now you know how to build a good prompt. The next question is, how do you make a good prompt great? And in this part, I'm going to share with you a couple of, let's say, model capabilities or framework capabilities that can help you to create your prompts in an even better way. The first one being JSON Mode. Before JSON Mode was introduced into BC AI Toolkit, this is how we had to prompt the model to get a JSON response back. We would say, extract user stories or bugs and return the information in JSON. Please make sure that it's in JSON format. No comments, only JSON, pretty please. And this is what the model would reply with. Sure thing, here's a JSON with all the information without any comments. And then here's the JSON. Oh. Now, of course, this didn't happen as often, but it did happen sometimes. And even when it didn't happen, quite often we struggled with the fact that the JSON we got back would have a bracket too few or a bracket too many. In any case, it wasn't a valid JSON. But now with JSON Mode, what we have is this one property that we can enable in the BC AI Toolkit that sets the JSON mode to true. And this will tell the model you can only return valid JSONs. You cannot return comments. And when you do return JSON, it has to be a valid one. No bracket too few, no bracket too many. Okay, so JSON mode is one of the ways how you can make your prompts better because you can ensure what you're getting out of the model. The next section here is going to be about tool calling. But before we dive into tool calling, I do have to apologize a little bit to you because I hate giving examples through chatbot examples. Because realistically, how many chatbots are we going to build within Business Central? Microsoft is going to build one, the Copilot Chat, but the rest of us, we don't have to build chatbots in BC. We don't need 6 additional chatbots. But nevertheless, tool calling as a concept is much easier introduced through an example of a chatbot. So I'm sorry, but here is how we would build a chatbot for Business Central. Let's say we're building it and we give it a system prompt like this. You are a friendly assistant that helps users navigate around Business Central. And then a user comes in and says, what is the status of the order 1001? Now the model could reply in 2 ways. It can either say, oof, I'm sorry, I'm unable to show that order information because I wasn't trained on your orders. I don't have access to your orders. I don't have any information that could help me reply to your question. Or on the other hand, the model could say, your order, it was shipped to Asia yesterday. Because as we saw at the beginning, maybe the word Asia just has a high probability when you try to complete the sentence, where was this order shipped to? Neither of these 2 answers would be good for the user because either they don't get the information they want or they get fake information. And here's where tool calling comes in to save the day. With tool calling, you can adjust the system prompt. You can say you're a friendly assistant, yes, but you also have access to the following actions. Get order info for details about orders. And when the user again comes in with the same question, what's the status of the order 1001? The model can first think to itself, wait, I don't know about that order, but hey, I can call this function if I want to get more information. So I'm going to call get order info with 1001. And then on the BC side of things, we would have a procedure like this. Don't pay too much attention to the code here. This wouldn't even compile. It's pseudocode. but it's just a way for you to think about how a function looks like. On the Business Central side, it would retrieve a certain sales header, and then it would give more information back to the model, like who's the customer, what's the status of the order, where is this order going. And with this additional information, the model can then reply, your order. Well, it's actually waiting for an approval from Tine. Okay. Why is tool calling so important for prompt engineers? Well, it's because it allows us to move away from just use cases where an AI could extract data out of text or generate text for emails, for example. With tool calling, we can now use large language models to retrieve the data out of the system or modify the data within the system. And that makes a big difference between just extracting and generating text. I have another example of tool calling, which is slightly less chatbot-y. Let's imagine we've built a feature somewhere on the customer list screen where the user can come in and say, I'd like to update credit limits for customers in North America by 15% and change their payment terms to net 45. A system prompt would look something like this. You're an assistant for managing customer data. You have access to the following actions: update credit limit, update payment terms. So when the user comes in with this request, the model would think to itself, okay, I need to call update credit limit with these parameters and update payment terms with these parameters. Now, here, I wouldn't judge you if you were a bit more reserved about this kind of functionality, because if you already have to build a function on the Business Central side that updates the credit limit, then how is this any different than just creating an action somewhere on the customer list that a user would click? It opens up a window where they specify the dimension code, they specify the new credit limit, and when they click OK, it would call that same procedure that would update the credit limit for all of the customers within that dimension. The answer is, it's not any different. It's the same code that would be executed. But here's what I want you to remember when you think about AI. AI is nothing but an interface to what computers could already do for decades. For decades, we already knew how to update credit limits. For decades, we knew how to update payment terms. But here's what has changed within the last couple of years. Before, the user always had to know, I have to go to the customer list. I have to find that action which is hidden somewhere. Oof, okay, now I need to remember that I have to input these kind of values into these kind of fields. That was the old way. The new way is a text box where the user can write the request in natural language. They can just say, I want to have these values changed for these customers, and that's it. But that's just a different interface. We already knew how to do everything behind the scenes for years. So AI is nothing but a different interface. A side note here, Andri is a very good, let's say, AI influencer to follow on social media because he's quite a bit more reserved compared to your usual influencer. He's not screaming all the time, AI is great, AI is awesome, AI is going to replace our jobs. He's more approaching this from what is AI bringing to us without all of the marketing overheads that we're overloaded with already all the time. Okay. So you know how to make a good prompt, and now you know that there's JSON mode, you know that there's tool calling to make your good prompt great. But how do you ensure that users use your great prompt in a great way? Because if you are just going to place a text box in front of a user and say, describe the number series you want to create or change, the users are going to describe them in 100 different ways. Half of the cases are not going to work. Half of the cases might work. So how do you ensure that the user is not disappointed because AI doesn't work the way I want it to work, and that you as a developer, you're not disappointed because the user doesn't know how to use my new feature? Well, you can show them the best way to use your feature with prompt guides. If you know that your feature works best for creating new number series or for modifying existing number series, add those prompt guides. And when the user selects these templates, they will get pasted into the window where they can then modify them, add additional information, but they will have a much better starting point how they can use your great prompt in a great way. Okay, so we have a good prompt, we turned it great, we are gonna show the users how to use the great prompt in a great way. The last missing piece is, how do we keep a great prompt great? And the answer is testing. We need to test our prompts. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a big enthusiast for testing in general. But here, like I said, I really want to show you 3 concrete reasons why testing AI features is even more important. If you're a developer, you might be aware of a concept called code review. You know, the part where you write the code and someone else comes in and reviews it if you didn't make any mistakes or if there's anything to discuss. For example, if I would write some code that is going to delete all customers when the user clicks post, somebody would flag that and say, no, we're not merging that in. There, it's clear. But when you move into this AI sphere, it's not as clear anymore. If somebody removes a line from the system prompt, is the AI feature gonna work better? Is it gonna work worse? You don't really know. But that's why it's so important that you test your prompts. Because if you have tests written for your AI feature, then you immediately know, is it better? Is it worse? Is it the same? So the first primary reason why you should test your prompts, why you should test your AI features, is because developers can break them. But it's not only developers. OpenAI can break your features. Right now, there's again a lot of new models coming out. O3 Mini, I heard that GPT 4.5 is the next one to be released. But at this moment, GPT 4.0 is still the flagship name when it comes to models that we use for features in Business Central. But in reality, it's not GPT 4.0. It's GPT 4.0 from August. Before that, it was GPT 4.0 from May. Before that, it was GPT 4, GPT 4.0613, GPT 4.0314. And all of these models, they behave differently. So how do you know when OpenAI is going to release the next model if your feature is working better with that model, or if it's working worse, or if it still works at all? Well, if you test your features, you have your answer. So the second reason why you should test your prompts is because OpenAI can break them. And then there's also a third actor, which you might not think about initially. Microsoft. Microsoft can break your prompts as well. Right now, you already know what is a user prompt. The question that the user types into the chat box. What's the status of the order 2234? And you know what's the system prompt. That's what we've been talking about today. Extract the order ID, use the get order status tool. But whenever you send the request through BC AI Toolkit, there's another layer, another prompt that gets added on top of your user and system prompts before everything reaches the LLM, the large language model. That's called the meta prompt. Meta prompt is responsible for ensuring that the user doesn't receive any disturbing information. It would look something like this. Ensure that no sensitive or confidential information is disclosed. Avoid speculative or unverified details. Meta prompts in themselves are a good thing. We need meta prompts. Meta prompts ensure that there's no copyright infringement, that there's no bad responses coming to the end user. But here's the problem with meta prompts. We actually don't know what a meta prompt is. what kind of meta prompt gets added when we shoot a request to OpenAI. And not only do we not know what a meta prompt is, we don't know when meta prompt changes. And whenever the meta prompt changes, that's a whole different text that is going to reach the large language model. And without tests, we don't know if our features are still working, if they're working better, or if they're working worse. So the third reason why do we have to test our prompts is because meta prompts can break them. So developers can break them, OpenAI can break them, and meta prompts can break them. Let's now talk about how do you actually test your prompts. Let's take a look at our example from before, determining if a discount can be approved or not. As a prompt engineer, how would I test this? I would come up with a question, something that would simulate what a user would type in. Determine if a discount of 12% can be approved for an order value of 8,000. And I would also specify what's the expected result, reject. And then I would come up with more cases. 7%, 6,000. 17%, 20,000, reject. 3,000, 8%, reject. 5%, 3,000, approve. And I wouldn't only change the numbers, I would also change the wordings. Determine if a discount. Can I give? Is a discount? For order value. Would a discount? And you can use AI to generate even more cases like these. And once you have more test cases, if you want to be a friend to your developers, you would package all of these into a JSON file where you would have one property called question. What would be the proposed input? What would be an example of an input? And what is the expected response for such an input? And now this final part, I'm going to show you a very small snippet of AL code, because testing on the AL side of things, the AL side is going to look different for AL features. If you've ever built a test procedure, you know that this is how it looks like. You also know that if you wanted to automate 18 test cases, you needed to build 18 different test procedures. That's no longer going to be the case for AL features. For AI features, I'm sorry. For AI features, you only have to build one test procedure, and it's going to run all of the 18 cases from that JSON file, which we saw a second ago. Here's roughly how it would look like. In the first two lines, you would extract the question and the expected response from that JSON file. Next, you would run your AI feature with that question from that we extracted from the file, and you would get back an actual response. And in the last part, you would simply compare the expected response with the actual response. So the best thing about the AI Test Toolkit that Microsoft has just released is that we no longer have such a big dependency on developers to automate many different test cases. And with that, I see we're coming to the end of time. Let's just recap what we've heard in the last 45 minutes. How do you build a good prompt? Instructions, steps, format requirements, examples, notes. These 5 components, or get a quick start through OpenAI's Playground. Once you have a good prompt, turn it great by using JSON Mode, by realizing that there's tool calling, and teach your users how to use great prompts in a great way by giving them prompt guides. And once you have great prompts, test, test, test. Because great prompts are great, but developers can break them, OpenAI can break them, and meta prompts can break them. And with that, we've come to the end where I'm going to say thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, now's going to be the perfect time. If you'll have more questions later, you can find me on social media. You can find me, well, you can see on the slides where you can find me. But just before we end, I want to say one more thing. which is don't build your prompts the way you talk to ChatGPT. Don't build your prompts the way you talk to ChatGPT. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tina. Really clear message on the end also. There are two questions, and I've also got one question. And the first question is from Arthur van der Voort. I guess a lot of partners would love to have the option to upload a PDF document that then created item in Azure DevOps. Is there any chance that this is becoming a product on the future?
So related to our tool. Yeah, maybe. Right now, we kind of discontinued that because we didn't have as many issues with copy pasting requirements. But why not? I mean, if there's enough need for such a tool, we could bring it up to speed, make it alive again.
Okay, perfect. And then a question from Christian Lenz. Would you say that a tight coupling of the AI function and a specific LLM version is necessary? Is it even possible?
Could you say that again? A tight coupling of what?
Of the AI function and a specific LLM version. And I think it's more about the what you said about the changing also the language model.
Yes. So I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. If this is related to the function calling, like the tool calling that we talked about, there you're not tied to a specific language model. You simply define your functions on Business Central on the AL side, and the language model just sees the signatures, right? And it decides, oh, I should call this procedure, I should call that procedure, I should call that procedure.
Yeah, and I think indeed, Christian means about also when you're testing it, you said, hey, the user can break it, but also the model you can break it because first you have tested what
okay. So where is this a problem? If you are self-hosting the deployment in your own Azure tenant, you don't have this issue because you are in control when the model gets updated, right? You can keep the same August version of GPT-4o for a year and a half, so you won't have this issue. This issue comes from the Microsoft's AI managed resources. I forgot the full name of the initiative, where we will no longer have to host our own AI deployments, but they're going to host them for us. That's where the problem arises, because they are going to be updating those models that are used behind the scenes. Now, I have talked with Microsoft. They said before we make the switch, we are going to emit a telemetry signal saying we are going to switch from GPT-4o May to GPT-4o August on this date at this hour, which is great. But unless you are sure that with the previous version and the next version, everything still works, that's when you can kind of get caught into this issue of your feature broke because Microsoft updated the deployment on the managed AI services.
So in that case, maybe you said, okay, if Microsoft has changed it, you have to be before that change and assign it on your test case to another better or the next AI model, and then test it very truthfully.
Correct. There are two procedures in the BC AI toolkit, if we go a little bit more technical. One is that just says get GPT-4o deployment, and the other one says get GPT-4o preview. So you should be testing your features, of course, for the current version, so you know if they still work, but also for the preview, because when Microsoft is going to switch, they're going to switch the main deployment for whatever is currently behind that preview function.
Yeah, that's really a great addition, I think, indeed, that you can test it to the next one, indeed. There is also a question from Sharon Lau. A really great webinar, thank you. Can we find your full code samples anywhere?
I don't think I have this up, but the testing part, sure, why not? I'll find the repository where I've done some AI testing. You have to realize that that's the code that I do for my fun side projects, not for the customer-oriented code. But if you would just like to see how you could test or how you should test AI features, I can publish that to a GitHub repository somewhere.
Okay, perfect. Then Arthur said also from thanks for the awesome question, great presentation. Also, Christian Lenz, thanks for the clarification on my question. And there is also now raising a question from Morten Bremer. Will there be an option to add partner custom tools to chat with Copilot for Business Central?
Very good question. I hope so. I don't have any unofficial news. I know anytime I've raised this topic with people, I got the answer eventually yes, but there are no commitments. I don't have any specific information when or how that would look like. Currently, what I know they are adding to chat with Copilot is the fact that it can source the documentation from our apps, but nothing yet for custom tools or functions. That's not yet available or not yet in the roadmap as far as I could see.
Okay, perfect. Then I've got just one question. You said about the method prompt can also change, and there is more like an inclusion from her. Please don't do any sensitive data or confidentials.
Yeah.
Is it then mentioned that I, as a developer, doesn't have to include that also in our system prompt? So I don't have to care anything about any sensitive information and stuff like that. So I can only clear my system prompt, but I don't have to include anything on my meta prompt. Or should I also include some guidelines or thresholds or railways into my system prompt?
Good question. Regarding responsible AI, Microsoft is covering, let's say, most of that in the meta prompts. It's not official what I'm saying. It's not like Microsoft is saying you don't have to specify that in system prompts. But from what I've seen, you don't have to include responsible AI topics in your system prompt because that's exactly what meta prompt is there for. Be careful though, that only applies if you are sending requests through BC AI Toolkit. If you would be sending HTTP requests directly to an Azure OpenAI endpoint, there's not going to be any meta prompts. And then it's on you to handle all of these details. So my suggestion is stick to BC AI Toolkit. The meta prompt is going to cover all of these responsible AI elements. And the system prompt should focus more on what should this specific feature do.
Perfect, indeed. Yeah, indeed. Stick to the toolkit. Indeed, that is really great. Those are all the questions. So thanks a lot, Tine, about this really great presentation and about how you make it clear, especially the very clear steps that you set from instructions, steps, format requirements, example, and notes. Really clear, and we have to memorize that all the way. Also, thanks for you listening on behalf of the Aropa webinar teams. Thanks a lot. If you want to see more about, you can visit our YouTube channel where it will be later this webinar presented on. you can subscribe to the newsletter, email us, or look at LinkedIn. So thanks all for watching this, and have a great evening, day, or wherever you are. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.